What happens when a father's love runs up against a daughter's pain that cannot be put into words? Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In this episode, we sit down with Jim, a father whose daughter is struggling with traits that seem to align with vulnerable narcissism. Jim finds himself pulled into a dynamic where love, guilt, helplessness, and a longing collide. This is a very powerful and emotional discussion. Jim's vulnerability really brings out the raw emotional cost of being caught up in a helpless helper dynamic with a loved one, especially a child. Jim is grappling with deep feelings of helplessness and frustration over his daughter's struggles and his inability to reach her, despite his best efforts. As you listen, you may notice that what unfolds is a story about the limits of trying to repair something that hasn't yet been symbolized. In other words, it has not yet been put into words. In his attempt to help, we can see how Jim unknowingly becomes part of an enactment. In other words, he gets tangled up in his daughter's vulnerability and helplessness and inadvertently, without even realizing it, contributes to it as well. Jim's honesty opens up the door to a deeper understanding of the psychodynamics at play in family systems, especially when trauma and unconscious communication begin to shape the emotional atmosphere. This conversation is raw, it's personal, and it offers an unfiltered look at how deep the emotional cost can be for parents who are trying desperately to stay connected to a child who seems lost. Let's listen in as Jim shares his story. Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. Today, I'm joined by a returning guest and thoughtful listener, Jim. He reached out with some compelling reflections and questions about a few episodes I released on the vulnerable narcissist. Jim always brings depth and insight to the conversation, so I'm really looking forward to diving into this with him. Get ready for another meaningful dialogue as we explore his observations and unpack some tough but very important questions that I imagine will resonate with many of you. So let's get into it. Welcome, Jim, or I should say, welcome back to the podcast, Jim.
Thanks for having me again.
Yes, of course. So I know that you had an opportunity to listen to a few of the episodes on the vulnerable narcissist.
Yes.
But before we jump into your questions, I just wanted to set the stage for anybody who's new to the podcast. You know, this may be a brief introduction to vulnerable narcissism. So what I covered in those prior two episodes, one of the first things was, what does vulnerable narcissism even look like? Like, what are we talking about descriptively, right? And if I said that more in psychoanalytic terms, it would probably look more like, how is their inner world expressed outwardly? So what do we see on the surface? And in general, they tend to present as what? Very needy, clingy, demanding. They struggle oftentimes just to manage their life, and they seem to need a bit of assistance with that, or sometimes a lot of assistance. When you try to talk to them about why they're struggling, it's not uncommon for them to shut down or to say, I don't know, which is really an unwillingness then to engage in solving the problem. So this is very different. And that's why it's a little nuanced, because most people think when they think of narcissism, and Jim, you and I spoke about this actually in the prior episode, as like the grandiose, the bravado that typically goes along with narcissism. And this is different because the grandiose narcissist is outwardly bragging or shining or looking for admiration, where the vulnerable narcissist is outwardly what? Vulnerable and needy, and they don't know how to manage their life. So those are some of the things that I covered in those prior two episodes. And then just briefly, I won't go into this in detail, but we also spoke about where does this come from? Like, how does somebody grow up to be this kind of or this type of narcissist? And by the way, I don't even like using the word narcissist, Jim, and you may have picked that up. I like to just say narcissistic characteristics or traits because we're not diagnosing anybody here. Right. And by the way, just for the audience, we're not diagnosing Jim either. And we're not doing analysis on Jim.
Well, maybe I need some. I don't know. I have some questions you might.
Well, I'll be careful, okay, Jim? So if I slip into an analytic mode, either you could tell me, yeah, this is okay, or, just let's not go there. So it's just in general, one of the theories speculates that early in life that they had these needs for whatever reason that went unmet, right? Maybe they had a caregiver who was irritated or preoccupied or depressed, or maybe even had their own narcissistic characteristics. So there was a level of emotional lack of involvement. So that's where we say it comes from. That's, again, one theory. And then to solve that problem, instead of feeling the pain every day, of not having somebody there, they turn it around. And that's how they live their life today outwardly, is they get people involved. So that's a great feeling, as you can imagine, right? It's hard to walk around feeling like nobody's there for me. And then if you could create a situation where you position somebody, again, not intentionally, you don't even know you're doing this, but to constantly be there and to take care of you, it seems like a wonderful solution to this earlier trauma that one experienced earlier in life. Okay, so I'm hoping some of this, Jim, sounds familiar. And maybe I'll just say one more thing, and then we'll jump right into your thoughts, reflections, and questions. So what do we do? Like, if we recognize that someone may be facing these kinds of struggles, I offered a way for someone to either, if they're recognizing it in themselves, to take care of themselves, or if they're recognizing it in someone close to them, how to begin to relate and take care of somebody in their life who may have these traits. And I spoke about the word containment. So we won't go into that now. I think it will sort of flow naturally as you and I begin to talk about things. But since you and I spoke, Jim, I've done a couple of these interviews, and this one woman, and labeled it very nicely. She said, "What we want is connection, not correction." And that was another way to describe containment: connection over correction. So I give her credit for that. That one didn't come from me. I tend to use the jargon, the psychoanalytic word containment. But anyway, welcome again, Jim. That was a little review. Hopefully it sounds familiar. And let's jump into things. So what's on your mind?
Well, first off, I wanted to thank you again for doing this and answering my questions when I emailed them to you. Because I do find the psychology now, I'm starting to get fascinating because I don't understand it. And part of that would have been, prior to your podcast, I would have thought the narcissist was the ego-centric, look at me, I'm great, I'm better than you, knowing that they don't really feel that way, I believe. But knowing all these different avenues of narcissism, I find fascinating. I started listening to your podcast, trying to relate a struggle I'm having with my daughter currently. Trying to pick out pieces of your podcast that I can relate to. And some of it is how to talk, how to react, which brings us to the containment too, which I kind of struggle with. Although I don't think my daughter or I have narcissistic tendencies. Right. We probably all do to some degree. But this particular one with the vulnerable narcissist, there are key things that I got frustrated with, but I really related to. Yes. So that's why I reached out to you.
Okay, yes. Tell me your frustrations.
Some of my frustrations are, and I'm going to use one of your quotes, was you prepared us, like, make sure you're sitting down, like, I'm going to tell you something. Okay. And although I can understand where you were going with your response, I don't believe how someone could stay in that. And what I'm getting at is, and you can clear it up, you have the helper and the helpless person. So when the helper has to sit back and say, okay, they're in need, the helpless person's in need. Yes. How can I take some of that off of them and put it on me? I'll take some of the blame, or I'll take some of the misunderstanding of the conversation. And I think in your podcast, you talk about the eggs and how he wanted them cooked. And I'm going to say the wife, for lack of a better term, the helper was like, okay, let me take some of the heat off of this and say, well, maybe I didn't understand. I didn't hear you and how you like your eggs. And I'll take responsibility for that. That's my bad. right?
Okay.
I can see that to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have to live a lifestyle because you're married to someone and this has to be your everyday routine, because the helpless person is not really seeking or receiving your help.
Yes.
I don't know how that could damage the helper to be like, well, every day I have to pretend that I'm part of this problem, or it was my fault, just to have the helpless person open up to saying, all right, let me calm down. Let's talk about this. Because I don't think they get there.
Mm.
And I think that would take a toll on a helper after a while, being like, oh, fuck, I'm trying every avenue. I'm trying to point it out to you. You don't see it. I try to take blame. I try to take responsibility for the mistake. It doesn't matter. And I just don't know how a psychiatrist would work with that.
Before I jump into it, let me just think for a moment, because I'm wondering if you can imagine this, and I think you can. So maybe this is for you, Jim, but maybe for the listeners as well. So let's just stay with the example that you gave with the eggs, right? Mm-hmm. Now, could you imagine that you are really looking forward to something, right? Like really excited that you're going to get something from somebody, and then it comes back and it's not at all what you thought it would be, right?
Right.
What's the feeling going to be? You're going to be what? Incredibly let down, disappointed. Yeah. But for the vulnerable narcissist, or someone who has these characteristics, let's say, because we're not diagnosing anybody, they're not just going to feel disappointed like one may, but they're going to feel what? Completely unheard, or disrespected, or rejected, invisible, like they don't matter. You didn't even pay close attention, Jim, to how I wanted my eggs cooked. Right now, they're going to be angry. And by the way, I'm saying these things like trying to tap into their inner world just based on anecdotal stories that I hear, when I get closer to these people. But you have to remember, the whole point of them rejecting you, Jim, or getting frustrated, or I don't know, blaming you that you didn't make prepare the eggs correctly, is to do what? To cover up all those more genuine feelings, right? So we don't really know what's underneath. On the surface, it seems like it's about the eggs, right?
Right.
But this is not a story about eggs at all. But so often, people get caught up in the manifest presentation, like as if this story is about me taking care of you, like, and this story is about me not preparing the eggs correctly, let's say. So the first step, and then you can tell me what you think about this, and we'll slowly unpack it, because I can definitely appreciate your frustration. And it is frustrating, by the way, especially if you're going out of your way to prepare something or to help somebody and they don't hear you or they don't accept it, right? That's what you were getting at, that it's not accepted, right?
Right. Well, I think you had touched on certain, depending on the day, the helpless person or the person who has these narcissistic tendencies can take your comment, even if I took ownership of the fault in the eggs, they can still take that as in, oh, but you're still saying it's my fault. Or because you misunderstood how I wanted my eggs because I didn't explain it well enough. Like, it's almost like their guard is up. So even when you try to relate to them as, hey, I'll take some of this heat off, maybe I misunderstood, it seems like they can still attack you as...
Well, that's great. Listen, Jim, no, that's great. I'm glad you added this other piece. If you think I'm stretching this a little bit too far, just let me know.
I'm sorry if I jumped.
No. This is helpful. I like the dialogue instead of me just talking. That's further evidence that it's not about the eggs. You see what I mean? So even if you're taking fault, like you just said, which, by the way, we need to talk about that as well, because that's not part of containment, but we'll clarify that as we go along. Okay. But what you just said, even if they still get upset and they turn it in a way that you're still blaming them, that's just further evidence that this has nothing to do with the eggs, that something deeper is going on here. And whether I prepare them correctly or incorrectly is irrelevant. It's not going to matter at the end of the day, because there's something burning deep inside of them that's still going unfulfilled, right? And now they could get frustrated with you, by the way, Jim, because you're talking about it as if it's about the eggs and you still don't actually understand what they're trying to communicate. You see what I mean? Like you said, I'm taking fault for the eggs, but it's never about the eggs. So then they're going to feel even more frustrated, because here it is again, to use your words from a moment ago, like you're invisible. They still don't even see me. They still don't get it. But of course, they're not communicating it to you, right?
I was just about to say that. Like,
go ahead, tell me.
How I was going to think, well, okay, but then then tell me what's really going on. So I won't react that way and make it seem like it's just eggs, who cares, over easy or scrambled.
Yeah.
If it's a deeper thing, then don't make it seem like it's just how I prepared your eggs. Tell me.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I struggle.
Yeah,
and
of course, because that momentary adjustment that you make, right, that you want to make with preparing the eggs, right,
mm-hmm.
it doesn't get to the core issue. It won't fix the core issue.
Right.
Because it doesn't address it. So since we're not getting to the core issue, what's going to happen is today it's the eggs, and tomorrow it's something else, and then the next day it's something else. So here's a little twist to it, unfortunately. Not advertently, Jim, but like you taking fault. Again, remember I said we need to dwell on this a bit more,
mm-hmm.
but it can actually reinforce the sense of inadequacy and vulnerability in your loved one, in your daughter in this case, that you're worried about. Now, what does that mean? So if you're taking responsibility, like just to stay with this example of not cooking
mm-hmm.
the eggs correctly, the bigger emotional reality is that the helpless person, as we said a moment ago, it's not about the eggs. It's about something else. And we don't know what it is. You see, that's the problem. Because you just said, Jim, tell me what it is, but they can't do it. It comes out in these, what I called, I don't know if you remember this concept, the literal mode of functioning.
Yeah.
So it comes out like literally take care of me in this way or that way or this way. And that becomes even more frustrating because it's not about that. But anyway, the main point is what? And I think you got it immediately, right? But if not, we'll dwell on it. It's really not about the eggs. It's about now you're caught up in what we call a reenactment in my field.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, something's getting played out between the two of you. And if you could step back, and I think you can, because you're here with me, obviously curious about this, then you just need to think about what is this dynamic? Or what's the real question here? Or what is she really looking for? If that makes sense. I don't know, please.
No, it does. Listen, I don't have the education that psychiatrists do or psychoanalysts and stuff like this. So I'm limited to where I can go. But I also have my personal feelings. Like,
yes,
you can only do so much before you have to say, okay, I need another avenue because this isn't working. Yeah. That's not working.
Wait, and let me just tell you, that's a great place for you to be, believe it or not. Now, on the surface, it seems like, oh, Jim's just getting frustrated, right? Mm-hmm. But, Jim, if you could say, I'm frustrated, and you can own that, which is wonderful, because now it leads you to say, you could do a couple of things with it. One is you could be like, I'm frustrated, so F her, I'm done with this, right? Which is an option, by the way. Or you could say, what? So I need to change, or something needs to change here. And it's not going to be her, at least not initially. Why? Because she's not sitting here with us. She's not interested in doing this, right?
Well, part of this podcast of yours, which I really hit home to me, was how the helper becomes the helpless.
Yes.
And
yeah, go ahead, take a minute.
in this scenario.
Wait, Jim, hold on. What happened? Just tell us quickly. What happened there? What went through your mind that got you emotional? Was it about that feeling that you were just about to describe? About feeling helpless?
It's part of the helpless feeling, but it's more about where I think she's taking herself. And because she's not asking for help, she's struggling and she knows it. For me to sit back and let her make her mistakes, especially since she's not asking for help.
Yes.
It kills me. I know they have to, ride their bike, fall off their bike, get back on. But her therapists, and there's a lot of the stuff you had mentioned, for me to sit back as a father, a loving father, and watch her, what I feel is destroyed. I'm so caught up in the decisions that she's making, which I believe are so wrong.
Yeah, wait, Jim, wait. Hold on. Because, again, you say things that are so important, and we want to dwell on them, okay? So you just said, I'm so caught up in her decisions, right, that you feel are so wrong.
Right.
And that's it. Right there, this is sort of at the essence of what's going on. Remember a couple moments ago, I mentioned that a dynamic gets played out between the two of you. Remember we were saying that before, right? Where you really want to do your best. Like you love your daughter and you really want to do your best. But then you get caught up in this dynamic. And this is it right here, what you just said. Right? Do you see what I'm getting at? Is that you really want to be there, and it feels to you, and I know you're going to point to objective reality here, but it feels to you like she's making the wrong decisions and you know the right decisions for her to make, if that makes sense.
It does. And I can hear that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I get frustrated with, how much damage she's going to do to herself till she figures out the right path for her, which of course I think is the right path from her.
That's right. That's the key.
And I know that's
the key. Yes.
But I do see her suffering. It's not like she's coming to me saying, oh, I love my life. My life is great. I know I dropped out of college. I know I don't have a job. I know I'm with an abusive boyfriend, but my life is great. It would be I might have a different response. It might be like, hey, you're crazy.
No, but but the fact that she's suffering, again, different ways to think about this, Jim, right? Now, one could be she's suffering and this is horrible and I can't bear to see her go through this. And I want to do something about it, like give her advice or suggestions. Now, the other way could be, and I think that's your way, the other way could be she's suffering and this is painful to watch. But at the same time, I appreciate this is such an important and necessary part of life. As painful as it is, I much rather her be suffering than living in some cloud that everything is great. Why? Because at least if she's suffering, now there's the potential that she could do something about this. And she is.
Okay.
Last time you and I spoke, if I remember correctly, I don't think there was therapy for her. I don't think she was interested in that, or she tried and then she stopped. I don't remember the exact details, but now I heard you just mention a couple moments ago that she's in therapy.
She's not in therapy. This was prior therapist.
Oh, I
when
see.
She was.
Oh, okay.
However, she might be going away to a program in Pennsylvania after Easter. I don't know if it's lip service or it's genuine.
Why would she go away to a program, Jim?
Well, her mother, who she lives with, was kind of like, you've dropped out of everything. School, work, life. You need to be in therapy if you're going to live here. I can't watch this in you.
Oh, I see. So, I got you.
Yeah.
So there was a threat. There's a threat.
There were times that, like, I remember my daughter had texted my ex saying, I hate my life. I need therapy. So I don't really think she is forcing her to go without Brooke having an open mind to it.
Yes.
I just don't need, if Brooke can pull the trigger and actually do it.
But that's what I mean. And I don't know if this helps maybe make it a little bit clearer, but she's not going to go unless there is a certain level of suffering. In other words, typically people are not so motivated to get help until there's a great deal of suffering. You know, obviously I have this podcast and people say to me, I don't think narcissists, ever come for therapy. Like, how do they come to you? Meaning to me, right? Mm-hmm. And I say it's usually after, I don't like this expression, but when they hit rock bottom, but I think you know what I mean. The main point is that when there's enough suffering or discomfort, that's what typically brings them in. And it sounds like you don't want her to suffer, right? But she needs, and I'm just reiterating the point, it's such a necessary, I don't want to say phase, but it's a necessary growth sort of trajectory for her to go through, if that makes sense.
It does. And I do believe that we have a good relationship because I can let her go and I can talk to her differently from learning from your podcasts and not parent, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, and not parent her under the banners of you need to do, we did this for you. How can you be? More like, like, do you think you're making the right choice? Like, did you really want to drop out of college? Was it too hard for you? Or did you do it for other reasons? Are there other influences? And talking to her, it's hard for me to do.
Yeah.
But I do think I still have a good communication with her because of how I'm approaching it now.
Yeah. Let's get back, though, because I know you had some questions and we kind of started with one. I don't know if we'll get through them. It's okay.
I didn't want this to be a therapy session for me, and I apologize. But the emotions
you did mention it at the beginning. You kind of warned me, right, that it may...
Yeah, it's a struggle that I'm having in my life.
Just out of curiosity, again, I know I said this isn't therapy, but as we talked it through, even just a little bit that we did, and we're
Right.
using some of these concepts, but at the same time, we're addressing like one question of yours. Where do you feel you are now? Like, does this help a little bit put things in perspective? Like, is there any sense of like, okay, it's not pleasant to watch her suffer, but I do appreciate that this is a necessary, process for her to go through. Does that help at all, or does it make it worse?
Well, the way you just said it
Mhm.
really worked for me.
Mhm.
More in layman's terms. The thought that she is suffering and the fact that she does fight with her boyfriend means I feel she's standing up for herself. She's not in that cloud nine saying, life is great and I'm just going to ignore my suffering. And
Yeah.
then there's no way to even have a door to open to talk about stuff.
Exactly.
So when you said it like that, it simplified it as to saying, okay, this suffering I know is necessary.
Okay, good. So let's talk about one other thing which didn't come up in your questions that you sent, right? But it's sort of emerging more naturally, which is this profound feeling that you have, right? That came over you. And I guessed the wrong thing, but I said helplessness. And you said, no, it's just watching her destroy herself, right? But my hunch, Jim, is it's probably a little of both. It's not one or the other. And the reason I'm saying that is because I could get the feel from you, like just listening to you today, that there probably is a sense of helplessness, which would be completely understandable for a few reasons. One of which is you mentioned that you give advice or suggestions and they go unheard. So that's hard. This is in my field what we call psychic helplessness. It's like you trying to change somebody, right? And it doesn't put a dent in their behavior. But also there's something else in my field that I think would be helpful for you to understand, or if anybody listening. It's a complicated concept. Most people heard of the concept called projection. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, Jim. Projection. It's like when you put your stuff onto somebody else.
Yeah.
But there's another concept called projective identification. What you just heard is only the beginning. We're still in the thick of the interview, and as we keep going, even more layers begin to unfold. The conversation takes unexpected turns and deeper issues begin to surface. Jim's story reminds us that some of the most powerful insights emerge not through answers, but through sitting with the pain that has no immediate solution. This is the projective identification I just started talking to Jim about. If this resonated with you, please stay tuned. You won't want to miss the release of the next part of my conversation. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. As always, if you have any questions, thoughts, or feelings, and you would like to share them, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to hear from you. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.